Maybe you remember the saying, I had to clean it up a little bit before I brought it to church, but you maybe remember the saying, when you're up to your armpits in alligators, when you're up to your armpits in alligators, it's difficult to remember that your objective was to drain the swamp. You're up to your armpits in alligators. When the complications come, when the opposition grows, when the toil and the trouble double, when the valley is dark and lonely, it's often easy to forget what you were here for in the first place, what you were trying to accomplish. When things get tough, when the alligators get nasty, when the darkness gets dark, when the loneliness gets lonely, we really wish somebody were here. Somebody were here to help us along the way. And Elisha, this newly ordained prophet that we heard about in the reading from 2 Kings, Elisha understands. Elisha understands. Today, he takes on the role of the big prophet, Elijah. Elijah was a big prophet, a powerful prophet. The shoes that he has to fill are huge shoes, and the times are tough. And Elisha is anxious. So that question that we heard him pose at the end of the reading, where is the Lord, the God of Elijah? Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah? That was a really important question to Elisha, and the answer was critical to his own sense of what he would be able to do as the new prophet who picked up the role as Elijah ascended up into heaven, into God's presence. What do you know about the relationship Elijah had with God? How was God present with Elijah? Can you remember the story that kind of tells how it was between Elijah and God? You go back to 1 Kings chapter 18. It's a wonderful, wonderful story. You read it and you laugh because it's a crazy, crazy story. It's showdown time between Elijah, the prophet of God, and the prophets of Baal. The Baal gods were the gods that belonged to the land before Israel came in to take the land over and make it their own. The Baal gods were agricultural gods. There were a lot of them. And for many, many years, from the time they moved into that land until the captivity, they kept struggling with trying to stay true to the true God, the God who brought them up out of slavery from Egypt. Trying to stay true to the true God, they kept getting sucked into worshiping these Baal gods. And so there were many, many prophets for the Baal gods running around too, just like Elijah was running around as a prophet of the true God. And it didn't help matters that Jezebel the queen, there's a reason why we don't name our daughters Jezebel. Jezebel the queen was a follower of the Baal gods, and she promoted the worship of Baal and drug her husband Ahab, the king who was supposed to keep Israel on the straight path, drug him into this worship of the false gods too. And from time to time the prophets would have to sort of have a showdown. And Elijah says it's time for one of these showdowns. Let's figure out which God is the real God. Let's put on the display that will prove the point. And so Elijah says, here's what we're going to do. Baal prophets, well, we'll both. You build an altar, I'll build an altar. A big altar, an altar big enough to do a burnt offering for a whole ox. So these are big altars, and this is a big production. You build your altar, I'll build my altar. We'll get everything all laid out, all the stones put up, all the wood put on, an enormous amount of wood because it's going to have to burn up the whole ox. Just don't set the fire. Remember the story? Nobody sets any fires. Just build the altar, and then Baal gods, you pray to your God, and you pray, and I will pray to my God, and we'll see which God sets the sacrifices on fire. So that's what they did. They built the altars, and the Baal gods, or the Baal prophets, 400 of them, start praying and praying and praying and praying, and louder prayers and longer prayers. And Elijah, of course, is goading them all the while. Maybe your God is asleep. You better pray a little louder to wake him up. Maybe your God's been on vacation. If you holler loud enough, he'll be able to hear you all the way in Colorado. Pray louder, pray longer, bigger. And this went on from early in the morning until afternoon, until finally Elijah said, okay, it's enough, it's enough. What happened while they prayed? Did anything happen? Remember the story? Prayed and they prayed and they prayed and they prayed and they prayed, and then it was time to quit. So Elijah says, okay, now it's my turn. Same deal, great big altar, big stones, all that wood piled up, the ox cut up on top of the wood pile. And then Elijah said, this is too easy. Get water. They gallons and gallons of water poured on top of all this wood, on top of all this meat, on top of it. He had dug a trench around the altar. The trench was full of water. Everything was just soaked down. Finally he said, okay, now we're ready. And Elijah started to pray. Remember what happened? Almost as soon as he started to pray, the fire from God came down. Not only did it consume the ox, it consumed the wood, it consumed the stones, it consumed the water, it burned the dirt. There was nothing left. Which pretty much explains the kind of God who was with Elijah as he did his ministry, who was with Elijah as he did his prophetic work. And Elisha knows that this is a tough mission that he is on. And Elisha knows that he needs to have that God right here, right now, with him as he begins his mission, as he begins his prophetic work. Because things are going to be tough. By chapter 3, it's already going to get nasty for Elisha. And he will need that same God who was with Elijah to sustain him and to guide him and to focus him as he does what God has called him to do. And so Elisha asks the question, where is the Lord? Where is the God of Elijah? And then he asks to find the answer. That stole that he had received from Elijah. He took that stole and he rolled it up and he made something he could strike with, and he struck at the river of Jordan. You remember what happened? The water parted and Elisha could walk back to the other side of the river, across the Jordan, back to where the people were, back to where his ministry would be. Which coincidentally is the very same miracle that Elijah had just performed, struck the water and the water parted, so Elijah and Elisha could cross to the far side where they could share that time together before Elijah was taken up. Where is the Lord? Where is the God of Elijah? Striking the water, he gets his answer. So when he goes back to that hard place to begin the role that is now his to perform, he knows that God is with him. He knows that he will not do it alone. God, the God of Elijah, goes with him. Now we shift to the gospel story. Jesus and the disciples have been together for more or less 3 years now. Jesus had called them to follow him. They had been following him as he went from here to there to other places to teach. They've been listening. They've been learning the stories that he had to tell them about who he was and what he was up to. So now it's time to focus on the goal. After this time, it is now time to focus on the objective. Whether there are alligators in the swamp or not, it's time to drain the swamp. And so Jesus, back in chapter 8, just before we read now, Jesus in chapter 8 calls the disciples together and he says, You've been listening to people around. Who do people say that I am? They said, well, some people think you're John the Baptist who's come back to life. Some people think you're the prophet Elijah, the prophet who was promised to come back to us before the Messiah came. Some people think that's who you are, Elijah the prophet. Some people think you're just one of the prophets. Okay. What about you? You have been with me all this time. You have been listening to my teaching. You have been asking me questions, and we've had these conversations together and so on. Who do you think I am? You remember Peter's response? Peter makes that great confession. You remember what he said? Peter said, you are the Christ. You are the Messiah. Then Jesus said, okay, boys, let me explain this to you. It is necessary that I, the Christ, it is necessary that I, the Messiah, must suffer, be tried, be killed, and after 3 days, rise again. Peter said, something's wrong here, Jesus. This is not the deal. The Messiah, the King, the one who is coming with great power, doesn't have to go through all that kind of stuff. That's not the way it's done. It was a long silence, and things got tense. And maybe it was tense. You've known those quiet, tense times when nobody dares to say anything and everybody just sort of sits and simmers for a while. Apparently it was one of those kinds of weeks, because there is nothing reported until Mark says 6 days later. 6 days later, when Jesus says, okay, Peter, the one who was having trouble with all this, and James and John, you all come with me. We're going up to this high mountain, just the four of us. something almost magical happens. The Greek word in the text is the word metamorphosis, and it means exactly what you think it means. Metamorphosis. Jesus was changed in this wonderful, powerful way. He was transfigured is the word that we use most of the time. Right there before their eyes, just for a few minutes, Jesus became what he would become eventually forever and ever. He was made bright and brilliant with the glory that would be his eternally. Why did it happen? Why did it happen? I think there are a couple of reasons, maybe more, I don't know, two at least. This transfiguration, of course, had a way of capturing the disciples' attention. There was no way to ignore what was going on right there in front of their eyes. As Jesus' face began to shine and his clothes began to shine, as they were surrounded by this luminous cloud, this cloud so full of mystery and light that you just couldn't ignore it. There was no way to ignore what was going on. There was no way to misunderstand the point of it all. There is no doubt that this one who is now transfigured, metamorphosed before them, was Jesus as God. Jesus in all of his divine glory. This is Jesus as he will be when the kingdom of God has fully come. This is Jesus as he will be when all of God's glory and all of God's power is revealed. This is a glimpse of the future. This is where we're headed. The second reason, I think, is this. The voice from the cloud, and you know who that voice is because we've heard the voice from the cloud before in some of the other stories. This voice from the cloud makes it very clear what's going on here. This is my son, the voice says. This is the beloved one. Listen to him. Especially you disciples, listen to him when he tells you about what is going to happen now. That stuff you could not hear 6 days ago. That stuff you couldn't hear back then. The objective, you recall, the goal, the purpose of this whole thing was to proclaim that the reign of God has come near. We heard it over and over in chapter 1 as we reflected on a bunch of those stories from the beginning of the gospel. Over and over and over we understood that the point of all of this, the goal, the objective, the mission was to proclaim that the reign of God has come near. And it has come near in the person of Jesus. And it has come near in the person of Jesus in this terribly odd way. Through his suffering, through his death, through his resurrection. And it will take shape in a world that seems pretty much like a swamp full of alligators. The objective that Jesus claimed for himself, the objective that Jesus claimed for his disciples, the objective that now belongs to us as the church because Jesus has passed it on to us. This objective is the same as it always was. It is time to proclaim the coming and the nearness of the reign of God. And we live also in a world that responds to the proclamation with all the warmth of a bunch of alligators. It is still our task to proclaim that the realm of God has come near. That's our objective, that's our mission. We are called to proclaim what we know and what we believe, that the reign of God has come near. Which is not a very easy task. Not a very easy task. And so what happens next matters. Remember what happened in the story after this luminous vision and after the voice and so on? And after all of that had disappeared and now Jesus looked like he had looked as they went up the mountain? Remember what happened after that? Did Jesus go on up with Elijah and Moses and sort of disappear? What did Jesus do? Together with the disciples, Jesus came down the mountain to face what he had to face. Jesus came down the mountain to do what he needed to do, to endure what he needed to do. And so we dare to believe, you and I, as we wade up to our armpits in the alligators as we try to do our mission, that Jesus also wades along with us, helping us remember our objective and keeping us on the course and guiding us through to the end. The image that sustained Jesus becomes the image that sustained the disciples, and becomes the image that sustains the church. We heard how St. Paul said it. St. Paul said it this way. It is the God who said, "Let light come out of darkness," that has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. The God who said, "Let the light shine out of darkness," has shone in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. light that shines in our hearts is the light that shone from the face of Jesus. That's the light that shines in our hearts, and it shines to help us see the goal. It shines to help us keep in mind the objective. It shines to see us through the dark place. It shines so our lives may tell the story. So we sing, shine, Jesus, shine. Fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze. Set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow. Flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord, and let there be light. Take that text from your insert and let's sing it together. It's one of those songs you really have to sing on this Sunday of the Transfiguration. One of the new songs, relatively speaking. Kind of a lively song, so you may air it out just a little bit